Hi, I'm Anthony Originello, CEO of the Chartered Professionals in Human Resources for BC and Yukon. We represent more than 8,000 members, and as the organization dedicated to advancing the HR profession through education, advocacy, awareness, professional development, as well as our recognized and impactful CPHR designation, we are proud to be a sponsor of this show. We have been the voice of the HR profession since 1942. Learn more about us at cphrbc.ca.
In this edition of Careers That Matter, I'm joined by Kim Haakstad, the President and CEO of the BC Council of Forest Industries. Kim, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Stu. Pleased to be here.
President and CEO of the BC Council of Forest Industries. So what does your job entail?
Yeah, so the BC Council of Forest Industries, or COFI, is a group that represents forest companies operating in British Columbia. Folks that are forest manufacturers. Largely they make lumber and pulp and paper and bioenergy, and then that then becomes other products that are made by secondary manufacturers.
So what does your job look like? Like on a daily basis, do you go in and say, yeah, I got to punch in the clock and for the next hour, I'm going to be doing this?
Well, that depends what my EA might have scheduled for me that day, but it's really varied. I am in steel-toed boots and hard hats and in business suits and everything in between. So my days are really varied. It is working with our member companies to make sure that they're receiving value from the dollars that they pay us as an industry association or an advocacy association. We speak with government on their behalf. We do communications on their behalf. So sometimes I'm doing media interviews or conversations like this. Some days I'm meeting with members. We spend a lot of time talking to government, and I spend a lot of time also out in the field in smaller communities, rural communities where forestry is happening.
Wow. So you're all over the place.
A little bit, yeah, but mostly in British Columbia.
Okay, Monday to Friday or 7 days a week?
The core of it is Monday to Friday, yeah. But when there's something going on, in early March, President Trump made an announcement on a Saturday night. So then I worked hard on Saturday night. We've had, media inquiries through weekends, or sometimes members need something and want to talk to me urgently. So it is a role where you're sort of available 24/7, but it doesn't mean that you're in the office 7 days a week. So
you do the advocacy and outward facing communications and so on. Internally, do you have a team that you run as well?
Yeah, so we have some policy teams and a communications team, and then like any organization, a finance team. And, COFI is also an organization that works really closely with some other organizations, the Canada Wood Group, the BC Lumber Trade Council. And so we do some back office functions for other associations and organizations that maybe wouldn't have the same kind of capacity that we do.
So how many people in your team then?
So there's about 12 people on our team, and we also have some folks that are employed by, COFI and Canada Wood Group, which is our international market development organization. So, generally we focus on British Columbia, but we also think about how we get our lumber to market in other jurisdictions, particularly in the Asia Pacific.
It's an interesting job.
I think it's interesting every day. I've only been at it for 6 months, so some of it's probably still a little bit of that honeymoon period. But I think that a job that, there's lots of challenges in it, but I think that a job that's varied every day is what gets me out of bed in the morning, right? Well, not having to do the same thing every single day.
Well, you took on this role at a time when the sector is not at its peak, which you go back 35, 40 years ago, it was incredible. So there have been challenges. And still you took it on. Why?
Well, I think in my career, I've been someone who's been really willing to take on hard things and run into challenges. It is what excites me. I think that I am someone who, no matter what I've been doing and at what level, one of the themes that runs through my career is that people have depended on me to solve hard problems. So I think maybe that's why COFI thought I would be a good person to come into this role at this time.
Because there are hard problems ahead. Let's go back to when you were in high school. Where'd you go to high school?
Grand Prairie Composite High School in Grand Prairie, Alberta.
And so you're graduating and you're thinking, yeah, a number of years from now, I'm planning on being the head of the BC Council of Forest Industries.
Well, I'm 17, so I'm young, and I'm a woman in a smaller than rural community, northern community. I guess we were a city, but not very big, about 25 to 30,000 people. And so a lot of it was you could be a teacher or you could work in a financial or administrative position at an oil and gas or forestry company. And so I went into, started in a Bachelor of Education, but when I got to the college and realized I could take something called political science, I quickly made that my major.
Why?
Well, I think it goes back to my dad and his best friend, Dennis. And as a teenager, I was pretty into the news. I liked current events, and I loved to debate politics with my dad and his best friend, who were much more conservative than me, to the point where actually my mom wouldn't let my dad and I watch the news together sometimes because we would argue. And looking even further back in my family history, my grandfather was a conservative riding president. And he was quite proud that when he would scrutineer at the polls, that he would generally know exactly how the vote would turn out in the local polling place where our family homestead was. And my favorite story about that is that one year he was off by one, and I'm not sure my aunt ever admitted that it was her that voted Liberal instead. And so it was his own family that he counted wrong.
So where'd you wind up? You finished schooling, you've taken poli-sci.
Yep.
Where'd you go?
Well, I came to Vancouver. So I did my second 2 years of university at Simon Fraser University. And I got here in September of 1996. And in October of 1996, I met a woman named Christy Clark. And kind of the rest is history. I worked with her for 9.5 years over a couple different versions of her career in opposition, and then as a cabinet minister, and then we had a break, and then as premier. But that really did, going to university, getting involved in at the time the Young Liberals, and meeting Christy really got me involved in politics.
What were you working in her constituency office?
First as a volunteer.
Yeah.
This really dates me. I'd cut out clippings from the newspaper and then photocopy them to put them in a binder so that we had a record of when Christy was covered in the media. Certainly all been digitized nowadays, but you started as a volunteer, and then one day I was actually that summer working back in Grand Prairie at a golf course, driving a beer cart and working in the bar. And she called me and said, come work for me. And so I started as a part-time constituency assistant when I was still in university. And then when the government changed in 2001, I moved into a political job as an advisor to the minister.
And what role was she in at that time?
Education, and then children and family development.
And you stayed with her through those?
I did.
So how long before she then left, because she went to go work at a radio station for a while?
Yeah, I stayed about 6 more months in government, and then I went and ran an industry association for pubs, bars, and private liquor stores. So, not necessarily different than working in the forest industry or at the council, at Kofi, but a very different membership and policy and issue set.
But she comes back as leader.
She comes back as leader.
The premier, and won re-election. Did you get a call early on when she came back?
Well, earlier than that. So, when you've worked for that long with a politician, you're part of the decision for her to decide to run for premier. And when she decided to run for office, she said, I'm not doing it unless you come on the road with me and travel around British Columbia while I campaign. So I spent 3 months in the winter traveling British Columbia, which I would recommend any senior politician do, because the logistics of that are complex. But yeah, we traveled around, met British Columbians, and then when she became premier, she asked me to be her deputy chief of staff.
That was an interesting job.
It was an interesting job. I only did it for 2 years, but I ran operations. So the staff in all the ministers' offices reported to me. I ran the corporate communications calendar, we called it. So all of the public events that the premier did, as well as helped with some of the decision making around what ministers would do when, to make sure that we had cohesive messaging coming out of the government. And also oversaw her whole schedule, public and anything that she was doing more as, the machinery of government work, like chairing cabinet and participating in briefings. And then also ran the correspondence unit. So everyone that wrote in to the premier to make sure that they were getting responses to their questions and concerns.
So why'd you leave that role?
So I left that role in a bit of a controversy, actually. I resigned when there was some questions about some work that had been done in government around multicultural outreach. And it was raised in the legislature, and it became a bit of a media storm right before an election where things are extra sensitive. It was the election where you'll maybe remember that there was an article on the front page of one of the local newspapers that said about Adrian Dix that this man could kick a dog and still be premier. Well, he didn't win that election, but just before it, I resigned. And, I did that thinking that I was the most senior person named in the controversy, and to help my member, the premier at the time, to make sure that there was a path for her to win that election, which she did.
Leaving under those circumstances is challenging. So what did you discover about yourself having gone through that?
So much, right? Like, one of the most important things probably is that I learned that I hadn't had a lot of adversity in my life, and that, you gain a lot of strength working through that. I spent 5 months unemployed, really not sure what was going to come next for me. But I found a really wonderful job at a company that at the time was called Spectre Energy. It's now part of Enbridge. And it was pretty tied to some of the work I'd done with Premier Clark, which was liquefied natural gas. And so I went and worked on a proposed liquefied natural gas pipeline. And I did engagement and negotiations with First Nations communities and worked with local communities along the Highway 16 corridor. And I built a program to help Spectra bring more Indigenous and local content into their supply chain. And when I finished that work, they asked me to go do that inside the company and build a program to put it into the operating part of the company. And I heard a few years later that Enbridge was using it. I don't know if they still are, but, built something that stood the test of time.
Did you have another job between then and now?
I did. I spent a little bit of time in agriculture tech, and I spent some time at a lobbying firm, so at a company called Global Public Affairs, doing government relations for clients in a variety of sectors.
And now you're at the Council of Forest Industries of British Columbia.
And it all sounds a little bit weird, but you can map it back to Grand Prairie. That is a community where my family were farmers. My ancestors were homesteaders. My grandfather was the last generation to farm. It's a community where oil and gas is a strong industry, and so is forestry. And my family weren't in any of those industries at the time. My dad owned an optical store, but we sold safety glasses and glasses to people working in the resource industries. And when the resource industries were having a bad year, our business had a bad year. When the resource industries were having a good year, we had a good year. So, there is a through line in my career that ties back to those Northern Alberta roots and the industries that fuel my hometown.
So, sitting at where you are in your career right now, what would you say is a personality trait that you've discovered that you have that helped you to, get through the journey that you've been on?
That's a good question. I've never really thought of it like that. I'm pretty tenacious. I'm not afraid to run into a challenge and find pathways through it. And, I get excited by working with people that are, that motivate me to help them, right? So when I think of the forest industry and I think of all the people in British Columbia, 100,000 jobs in the province depend on that industry. Of course, I want to help those folks retain those jobs and keep working in the sector. So, I'm really motivated by those things. I don't know what personality traits they are necessarily, but...
Well, you don't give up easily.
I do not.
Yeah. Well, thanks for giving us a glimpse into your job and your career path.
Thanks so much, Stu.